somebody started, it doesn't get in time. Well, what I would like to ask from you is, we have this dilemma of having a secular state, in which according to the Constitution, it's actually religious neutral. And then we have very religious people. And we have to navigate within that. I think it's, for many of us, a personal but also a public concern. How do we navigate within the secular state as being, in my case, a Christian, in another person's case, another religion? And it has a very strong bearing on education. I think it's one of the most important questions within public schools, which use public money. But it could even become relevant to independent schools, where somebody might argue that because of the secular nature of the state, not even independent education should be allowed to promote a certain religion in school. I think that would be an extreme application of the secular nature of the Constitution. But as we have seen, the real Constitution shifts all the time, while the written Constitution remains unchanged for decades. The real actual Constitution of the country is changing all the time, and it is changing away from religion in schools, where that was fairly standard in the early phase of the present dispensation. Now, the reason why I'm saying all this is I want to ask from the Christian network, how do you envisage, I would like to say us, because I share that Christian value system with you, but let's term it in more general terms. How should religious groups navigate within the secular state? And should one look maybe at even pushing back in order to shift the Constitution in the other way than which has been becoming the norm in the previous years? Thank you, Honourable Chair.
Honourable Zwela, the department. Can I allow you to say something?
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Okay, firstly, I'd like to address these in the order that they were asked. So if I start off with Mr. Boshoff, this question of that South Africa is a secular state, I was challenged that as a myth and very misleading on a number of points, and especially with regard to education. Firstly, the Constitution starts with a preamble that acknowledges God. And secondly, we have specifically a clause on education in the Constitution that allows for religious observances. And I know that that was put in very specifically by the Constitutional Assembly to avoid an American type situation of the 1960 wrong interpretation of the American Constitution that then excluded religious observances in the schools. Now, that clause in the Constitution needs to be read in parallel with the Schools Act, which was written also at the same time, in 1996, and which parallels it in almost identical wording, except for the changing of a few words, which further clarifies that the authority that is intended by the Constitution to make that decision on religious observances is the school governing body. Okay, so that is the first issue. The second issue is that at the time, there was huge protest from parents about the risk that South Africa would have a secular state, and we had a promise specifically from Cyril Ramaphosa that South Africa would not be a secular state. That was reported in the newspapers. So that is on the interpretation. I think you're not going to find any of those people who were around at the time interpreting that way. Further, one has Minister Bengu's policy that he instituted at the time, the first education minister that was after the Constitution, explicitly that his religion policy allowed for different schools to have complete freedom to choose a single medium religious instruction if they wanted to, paralleling the policies of Nigeria and of Israel, for example. So this is a myth, and there are many ways of accommodating difference within the parent body. That includes, firstly, different schools having different policies and people choosing that. Then within a school, you can have streams where people go off and have different religious observances if they want to. And then you can also have conscientious objection, which is a third level to accommodate parents. So that is something which is simply not a correct interpretation. Now, we've had this progressive erosion since Minister Bengu's very good policy of religious freedom and parental rights. And Minister Kata Asmal took a huge chunk out of that freedom with his 2003 religion and education policy. He had a meeting in this building at which I was present, in which he then presented his policy, claiming he had now listened to parents and religious bodies that were protesting against that. I put 10 points that we had not agreed with forward to the group. I was thrown out by security. Okay, there is no agreement. We did not agree to that policy. We continue to protest against that. Then further, there was the court judgment in 2017, which 6 schools were challenged on their religious observances. We would argue that was a wrong court judgment. It should have been appealed. It will be appealed in future. That is not a correct interpretation of the Constitution. Anybody wants to discuss this is welcome to speak to me, or we can have a debate on radio or whatever. But to me, this is a power grab by the state from parents and away from religious freedom, and we want that power back again. Then the question that the parents must, through those structures, decide on how that public money is distributed in various ways according to their preferences. I can talk more than that. I don't want to run out of time. Then in terms of the question of